Hi, my name is Tehila Edelman. I am the great-granddaughter of Bumi Gelb, a Holocaust survivor, a dear man I call my Saba. I'm here today representing all of his great-grandchildren. My Saba is my role model because after all the unimaginable pain, hardships, and trauma he has been through, he still continued to have a positive outlook on life and a close relationship with God. When my Saba came to America to rebuild his family, he taught his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren the importance of Jewish values. I am who I am today because of my Saba. One important lesson I learned from my Saba is that as long as you remain focused, stay positive, and know that God is with you, wherever you go and whatever you do, you can achieve anything in life. It's important that we're all here today to hear my Saba's story and to never forget what the Jewish people have been through, because by knowing our past, we can move forward as a stronger people. Now, introducing my role model, the patriarch in our family, a God-fearing man, my dear Saba, Bumi Gelb. Please come up.
Thank you. My story is simply about one person who survived the atrocities of the Holocaust. Let us remember and hold in our hearts the 6 million plus who did not. It was just this time of the year, Pesach, 1944. I was seated at a table. I was not quite 17, with my dear mother, Miriam Gelb, my 3 precious sisters, Libo, 14, Zlata, 12, Blima, 10, and my aunt Mali. My father, Emil Gelb, Menachem Mendel, had been taken to the Hungarian slave labor camps 3 years before, along with about 30 other men from our small village, Sils, in Subcarpathia, which used to be Czechoslovakia, now is Hungary. About 60 families, Jewish families, lived in our village, amongst 2,000 families who were Greek Orthodox. On this sacred evening, Pesach, the Jewish homes were eerily without fathers at the head of the table. My mother asked me to conduct the Seder. Slowly, I start. We all break out crying. We missed our father terribly. By that time, we knew our situation was very, very bad because we saw SS troopers visibly everywhere. There was a knock at the door. Hungarian border guards, the most vicious and feared, fully allied with the Nazis. They were now appearing at each Jewish household at the time of the Seder. They shouted at us, "Pack up, you have 7 days. Take as many belongings as you want. You're being relocated." They said it was because of the Russian onslaught which is about to happen. We knew it was a lie because only Jewish homes were visited. Our Jewish men were already in the horrible slave labor camps. Looking back, I realized that only about 5 or 6 from our village out of the 30 survived and returned after the war. So we packed food, bedding, anything that could be loaded in the wagon they provided. Pain, fear gripped us. My mother, very devout, loved and respected by so many. My mother, around the age of 35, had previously gathered the local Jewish mothers together in our home. A 3-room house built and lived by the Gelbs since the early 1700s. Our home, no electricity, no running water, but there was love and hospitality and deep, warm spirituality. My mother offered the women guidance on how to best manage their homes and families during the absence of their husbands. The fear was palpable. No hope in sight. We were taken for a short while to Orsula and then to Munkaj Ghetto, which is a huge brick factory. We came together with much of the Subcarpathian Jewry, at least 10 or more villages in that camp. Life in the ghetto was insufferable. No privacy, constant fear of beating from the Hungarian troops and from the German SS, who controlled us. Crying everywhere, cruelty everywhere. In May 1944, the train with cattle cars started entering the ghetto. We were shoved into them, families still together, but not knowing where we are going or where we are going to be taken. Physical condition deplorable. We arrived at Auschwitz 3 days later at about Schwarz time. Auschwitz, the separation began. Very quick, crying, screaming. Smokestacks in the background. One moment, the family together. A moment later, separation was final. We found out the next day that children who were not of working age and older people were gassed and burned in crematorium. My dear little sisters, Zlatko and Blincho, so many others. Hearing this, I decided I needed to volunteer to anywhere out of Auschwitz. For me, it was the beginning of 4 more nightmarish, horrific concentration camps. Next, Buchenwald, where I was processed and given the number 55562. No more name, now simpler number. Following a short stay, I was sent to Dora, a satellite of Bochum. We performed back-breaking labor building brick walls and the newly completed tunnels where V2 rockets were manufactured and rained upon England. We heard about 30,000 people died the year before building these tunnels. I remember how some mornings on our march to work, which is about 20 minutes from our barracks, one would start davening and we all followed quietly. It was forbidden. Communication among the prisoners was completely forbidden. But just the same, we took a chance. And it was in Dora that many prisoners, many of us, chose to fast for Yom Kippur. After about 4 months, at the end of November '44, truckloads of us were transferred to Elrich, also a satellite of Bochum, an horrific place. Prisoners constantly dying of starvation. Between 4 and 5 o'clock every morning, very scantily dressed for the bitter freezing cold weather, we were forced to stand for a repetitive, brutal counting. Always visible were stacks of bodies 40 to 50 feet tall. It was winter. And surely visible to the people around the camp. They would eventually be removed and shipped to crematorium Bochum, over and over. About 3 months after we arrived in Elrich, extremely malnourished, I developed a severely gangrenous left foot. I put on a rag on it, which stuck to it, it couldn't be removed, and I could no longer work. So, my throat tight, my heart beating wildly, frozen to the marrow, I decided to take a chance and to go to the infirmary, knowing fully well there would be no return. No one ever returned without the infirmary. Following the subsequent transfer to the dreaded typhus ward. The Nazis at that time started to evacuate because the Allies closed in. So we prisoners from the typhus ward were put in open train cars, perhaps 80 in a car, with food for 5 days, and the next 4 days there was no food at all. Many people died. Every stop, the dead were taken out. After 9 days, the train arrived at Oranienburg, which was where, when we arrived, only 8 of us were literally carried out, which, thinking back, totally miraculous. Why would anybody want to carry us out? And placed in near barracks. The camp Oranienburg was very close to Berlin, and the siege by the Russian army was fully on. There was constant bombardment, artillery, and bullets were flying left and right, and I couldn't move. Right? Left and right of me. Friends helped me with basic needs. Around April 16, 45, the Germans left, and the Russians came in, and we were declared free. I was taken to the local military hospital. The Russian doctors performed surgery on my leg. I went into a coma for 2 months. When I woke up, I made my way back to my village, Sils, Subcarpathia. Fortunately, as bad as it was, I found my father, my sister, my aunt, my dear mother, and 2 younger sisters, and more than 100 relatives perished. April 1948. My father, sister, my Aunt Molly, and I arrived in New York to be welcomed by relatives with whom we celebrated Pesach that evening. I got a job, went to high school, some college, served in the military in the Korean War, married my wife Sally, my dear Sally, who chose with all her heart to bring into our home the continuity of my warm religious home and its richly spiritual previous generation. Thank you, Sally. Thank God, our dear children, Ellie, Miriam, Ezra, precious grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Our little jewelry store, which was closed on Shabbos, helped sustain us financially. We have enjoyed an open home. We're deeply connected to our little young Israel of Hartford for more than 40 years, to Chabad, now Young Israel West Hartford, to the Hebrew Academy, the Mikveh, our beloved Israel. April, tonight, 28, 2019. I would like to thank you, dear Ezra, Miriam, Tehila, for being here together with us, with me, this evening, and representing our family. My dear Sally and I have indeed been blessed to see generations deeply connected to Hashem, our Torah, our people, Israel, and praying for the good of all peoples coming together in peace.
Thank you, Bumi. What a privilege and an honor. Thank you for sharing your testimony with us this evening. It is now my honor to welcome Bumi's son, Ezra Gelb, granddaughter, Miriam Edelman, great-granddaughter, Tehila Edelman, with me on the bima for a conversation between generations. So I am struck that we gather here on the day after Pesach, and we think that when we commemorate Pesach and we remember the Exodus from Egypt and we think about the festival of liberation, we also tell the story. As it says in the Torah, "V'higadet levincha," you should tell your children. So I want to ask each of you, when you hear your father, Ezra, grandfather, Miriam, great-grandfather, Tehila, share his experiences, what do each of you see as the obligation of memory that is passed on to you? Ezra, you can start.
So our parents brought us up in a very loving environment, religiously, respectfully, to love and honor others. And that message continues, and we try to treat people with kindness, with love, with respect. And my father was asked, taunted, when you were 11 years old, what kind of a Jew are you? Are you a Ukrainian Jew, a German Jew? What kind of a Jew are you? And my father said, I'm a Jewish Jew. And that's what we try to aspire to be. We try to be unified, we try to be together, and as my father said, we want peace for everyone.
What do you see as the obligation of memory that is passed on to you by your grandfather? Why is it so important to remember?
Well, first of all, it's extremely important to remember because any younger generation, first of all, I have to start with the younger generations. It's a huge opportunity to have a survivor here. And I'm sorry, I'm not a big speaker and I'm a little nervous. The reason it's so important is because we don't want history to repeat itself. We have we have a few survivors left, and we need to reach out and hear their story. And the children, our children, have to hear the story so they can pass it to their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And because when we hear the story from our survivors, it enables us to hear our past, where we've been, and God willing, it will strengthen us and unify us as a nation going forward. So this is all important. All children who haven't met a survivor and people who haven't, even adults who haven't met, it's important that we meet and we hear their story and make it part of us and make it part of our lives.
So it's important to remember because we become stronger from learning about our past.
Thank you. So as you hear Bumi share his experiences, I wonder which parts of his story, when you hear them, resonate the most with you. And when you tell others about what he went through, which part of his experiences do you most want people to know and to learn from? And Tehila, I'll start with you.
The story that resonates most with me is the dedication of my great-grandfather to be reunited with his father and sister and to rebuild his family. And the parts that I want people to know his experiences, to learn from, is how my Saba never gave up even in the darkest times when it was really hard for him.
I actually have a few things. So before the war, it's so important to me was the way my grandfather was raised in a home of love and Torah observance, and the way my grandmother raised my grandfather was very special thing to me, being I'm named after his mother, Miriam. And when she was about, I think she was about 37, it was around my age, her husband was sent to the labor camps. And she had to watch her children by herself. She had to keep the family businesses going by herself. And she could have, her son was away, my grandfather was away at the time. He was learning in yeshiva, and it would have been an amazing opportunity for him to come back to help. But my grandmother was so dedicated to Torah and wanted my grandfather to stay and continue doing his learning, even though it would have made it harder for her. She wanted him to stay there. And the way that she raised, and my great-grandparents raised my grandfather, is the way that my grandmother and my grandfather raised their children, and they've raised their grandchildren and grandchildren with an open home and Torah and mitzvos and dedication and working hard. I have another story. Can I say something else? Another idea also was when my grandfather was close to liberation. So the Russians were liberating them, and my grandfather was a mere 70 pounds, and he was starving, and we can't imagine the pain and the hunger that was going on. And he remembered a Gemara that he learned when he was a couple years earlier, when he was about 15, that when a person is starving and they're fasting for so long, and they jump into eating a large abundance of food, their stomach can expand and they can actually die instantaneously. So my grandfather remembered that, and at that time of such hunger, he was able to bring his Torah knowledge forefront and not only save himself, but he was telling others and helping others and letting them know that, and he saved other people's lives because of that. It's such a hard time. He had the mindset to help others, and that's my grandfather. And I have one more thing. Today, recently, my son became bar mitzvahed, and it is obviously a very holy time. And my grandfather called me up saying that he had a set of tefillin for my son, but it wasn't just his tefillin, it was his father's tefillin that he had. And my son happens to be, he was named after him, and it was a beautiful thing to be able to pass down the tefillin from his father to my son, and to continue and showing the continuity and the mitzvah continuing from, even though there was the Holocaust in the middle, that the mitzvah continued being passed down from my great-grandfather down to my son, and continuing to put on the tefillin every day. So I just wanted to share that.
Sure, I'll repeat it. So the question for you, Ezra, is when you hear your father share his testimony, his experiences, what part stands out most for you, and what do you want others, when you retell his story, others to learn from the most from what he went through?
So my father, thank God, is a survivor, but just because the Holocaust was over doesn't mean everything's fixed. And when my dad met my mom and they started talking, my mom could tell my dad wasn't 100%. So my mother said to my father, "Do you want the Germans to finish what they started?" That brought my father clarity. That set my father and my mother on the path to healing, to discovery, to realizing there is something to hope for, there is something in the future, and we're going to make a family, and we're going to make a life, and thank goodness you did.
So I have one more question for all of you, and I want to end with Bumi. We'll give Bumi a chance to answer this question as well. So we sit here tonight united as a community. We're here in Bethel. And as Rabbi Rosa noted, we're gathered here together as a community, and we note the terrible events that happened yesterday in San Diego. And at the same time, we are united by our strength together. And in fact, last month when I met with Bumi, he cited for me this verse from Shmuel, Netzach Yisrael v'yishaker, the eternal strength of Israel shall not be belied. And so my last question for each of you is, when we remember the horrible events of the Holocaust and we think about traumatic experiences that Jews have gone through without history, what do you see as sort of the way in which Jews respond? What is the Jewish response to these types of horrible events? And we'll pass it down the line and let Bumi answer last.
So, in our time, we have Israel. We have a Jewish nation. My father and mother always told us how lucky we are, how privileged we are to be able to worship as Jewish people in the United States. It's not a given. This freedom is not a given. So we move forward with hope and commitment. We do kindness, we do good, and that's how we honor our past, and that's how we forge ahead to our future.
A couple of years ago, the way I can relate to this is, a couple of years ago I was going through something traumatic, and I needed to turn to somebody who went through more than I could imagine anyone. And I turned to my Saba, who went through more trauma, more pain than anyone could imagine. And I said, I need to make a decision in life. I need your guidance. What helped you make the decision that you made to stand strong and not to give up and to go forward and want to rebuild? What advice would you give to somebody like me who's going through a lot? My grandfather said, and this is what he told me. One, he said, I needed to be completely honest with myself when making the decision. Two, I needed to 1 minute, needed to be completely honest with myself. The second thing was, I needed to know what I wanted out of life itself and what I wanted out of life. And three was, I knew whatever decision I was going to make would affect my children, my grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And with that, I was able to make my decision. And with that, we're surrounded here because of you and because of your decisions you've made, where you're surrounded with your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and you've taught us unbelievable values that we can attain anything in life if we stay focused, if we stay close to God, and we do the will of God in Torah, mitzvahs, and ma'asim tovim, we can attain anything.
The response I see to Jewish trauma is, through the ages, the Jewish people have united and turned to God.
We are grappling with unprecedented losses. We have been grappling with unprecedented losses. And the important decision that people made, Jewish people, is turn back to Torah, because that connects us as not only as a people, it connects us to God, and it unites us. And everybody does what they can, as much as they can, or as little as they can. But the main thing is, we are not Jews because of suffering. We have positive things to look forward to build. We need to build generations, knowledgeable generations, who are able to withstand the verbal onslaughts, especially in the colleges today. Unfortunately, many very bright students Jewish are completely undereducated Jewishly, and therefore, unfortunately, many of them join organizations which are anti-Jewish. And that is something that we still have to work on to make us proud Jews. And it comes from the family, it comes from the rabbis who give drushes and shuls, it comes from education, and that is the most important, in my opinion, in order to go forward and to keep building.
Thank you, Bumi, Ezra, Miriam, and Tehila.